Hey gang, so we have the new roadmap. I'm a little bit behind the times on this one, so I was just going to go ahead and go over the new stuff. We got a couple little things I wanted to point out that I don't think anyone's actually noticed yet, so if that sounds interesting, let's get this. And I just realized that I am wearing a green shirt and I just had a bunch of Mexican food. Professional. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into this. So a couple things I wanted to do here. If you've never seen these before, I don't really need to do the caveats anymore for a reason I will get to in just a second. But basically we have the roadmap roundup here, which has a couple interesting things in it, actually quite a few interesting things. Then we're going to go into the release view, and then I will go ahead and talk about the latest patches to hit the PTU in ePTU, because there are a couple interesting things there. I can't show you pictures or videos from it because I am ePTU. So let's get into the roadmap roundup. Notable changes for June 26, 2024. The following cards are committed for Alpha 324. So that is a significant pass. Storage access, adding storage access kiosks to the persistent universe, allowing players to retrieve and store FPS items at multiple locations. I need to test this out in ePTU. I haven't tested this one out because I'm kind of getting mixed messages about what they do exactly. From what I understand, basically what this is you have stuff stored in your local inventory. You use the kiosk to send it to your hangar, and then it will raise it up in the hangar. So you don't have a magical bag of holding anymore. You have these kiosks, which kind of goes along with the whole plan of CIG and Chris Roberts to have everything physicalized to make sense. You have no more magic stuff other than moving faster than the speed of light, just saying. Freight elevators. Implementation of systems and content for players to physically load and unload cargo to and from their ships by conveying cargo to and from hangars, landing pads, garages, and docking collars. Yeah, this is going to be a pretty big sea change for the entire verse. Basically, it's going to be interesting to see how older ships like the Carrack or the Reclaimer will work with this, because you can't move the biggest crates out of the Reclaimer in its little elevator. So you'll have to do the 8 SEU instead of the 16 SEU, because the 16 SEU won't fit in the cargo elevator for the Reclaimer. So you'll have to do 8s, move them down that way, and then move them onto the freight elevator and then sell it that way. I'm going to get to this in a second when I'm talking about the economy, so stay tuned. New missions, cargo hauling. Making use of freight elevators feature, this mission type will have players hauling large quantities of cargo to earn both EUEC and reputation. Do not pay real money for Alpha UEC. Don't do it. Personal and instanced hangars, creating new tech that creates an instance of a player's hangar to allow for uninterrupted management of cargo, inventory, and vehicles. Personal hangars are found at a player's home location and allow for customization and organization of a hangar's interior. From what I understand, not even from what I understand. What I know is that now land vehicles, all the space bikes and stuff like that, as opposed to having to go to some mining location and kind of land, leave your ship open, possibly vulnerable, even to NPCs, like bounties will spawn over those places. And people are always complaining, I got shot and I was just parked in a mining zone. It's kind of like, yeah, as an NPC, because somebody's doing a bounty, so the NPC spawned right over you. They can shoot in the armistice zone and you can't. Congratulations. Or it could be a player too. But anyway, you won't have to do that anymore, because now you'll say, I want my Tumbrel Cyclone. You'll call it up on your little kiosk in your hangar and it'll come up on the freight elevator and you can just drive it in your hangar onto your ship. So I think it will be limited to that home hangar that is at your home location. So you won't be able to go to any location in the verse with the hangar and say, I want this vehicle, because it'll only be at your home location. That's my understanding. You might be able to do an insurance claim and get it at another location. I haven't tested that. I actually will probably test that next. Dynamic event, blockade runner. So this is one that they previewed, I think at the end of last year. They didn't have a video on it, but it kind of popped up on the roadmap for a little while, and we were all like, oh, what's that? That sounds interesting. Never heard. Dynamic event, blockade runner, a new dynamic event where players defend shipments of Quantanium from Ninetales piracy. So that could be kind of cool. So one of the things that I liked about the original Jumptown, first of all, it was organic. CIG didn't put it on. The Jumptown was a location on Yela that produced drugs. I think any of the drugs, but Widow was the big one at the time. But it didn't have a location. You had to, well, it didn't have a location that was marked on the map. You had to know where Jumptown was. And there's only a couple ways you could find that out. Either you'd watch videos and people would be like, this is how you find Jumptown. Or you would take a mission with the Ninetales that was like the resupply mission, and the last place you ended up at was Jumptown, or you could follow someone who knew where it was. And usually people could get in the area, and then you'd look for the other ships and you find it that way. But what happened was Widow was far more valuable than any other thing. And again, I'm going to get to this when I start talking about the economy. And it created a single location where this thing was available. And there was a limit to the stock. So what would happen is people would come down and try to lock down Jumptown. And you'd have orgs come in and try to say, nobody can sell drugs. We're locking this down. This is illegal, and we're a lawful group. And you'd have other groups like pirate groups are saying, we're locking this down and we're going to buy as much drugs as possible. And occasionally you just have solo players come in, and you'd have people extorting them and saying, hey, we'll let you buy boxes if you pay us however much money. And it just created this really interesting dynamic, because everybody had their head on a swivel when they were coming into Jumptown, because the threat of violence is always there, which is why you play an MMO over a single player game. In this case, the chaos and the unpredictability is afforded to the game by the other players. You can't necessarily predict what those other players are going to do, and that is what made Jumptown interesting. Nowadays, you just have people forming up conga lines, and occasionally you'll have somebody upset and drop an A2 bomb on them, Moab on them, which isn't Jumptown. I've got a couple ideas for things that would be Jumptown-esque that would kind of bring back that sort of original feel that I'll probably talk about in a later video, just kind of spitballing, because all of us are armchair devs. Anyway, one of the last things on the roadmap roundup that I wanted to point out was down here at the bottom. It says join the discussion on Spectrum and check out the roadmap companion guide for more information on Star Citizen public roadmap. If you notice, what is missing here is the progress tracker. For months and months and months now, we've had there is no update to the progress tracker as we are implementing new teams and integrating teams from Squadron 42 and the Persistent Universe and joining them together. We'll be coming out with a new progress tracker shortly. This kind of tells me what I've been suspecting for a few months, is that they're just going to do away with the progress tracker. or they're going to change it so significantly it'll basically be something else. So that was number one of the things that I have noticed that I thought was rather significant, is that verbiage is missing. But let's go ahead and look at the release view. We'll check this out because this is, I believe, the first time that we've seen 3.2.4. Last time we just had 3.2.3 and 4.0 and the promise of 3.2.4. So here we've got it. We've got freight elevators, new missions, cargo hauling, personal and instance hangars, storage access, and the dynamic event block runner, or blockade runner. I would assume we're probably going to be getting a ship of some type when this drops. Probably a cargo runner, if I had to guess. Would make sense since you're dropping a cargo batch. Maybe the whole B, but I seriously doubt it. Whole B would make sense. And then, of course, we've got 4.0 looming on the horizon. So when do I think 3.2.4 will drop? I'd say mid-July. It seems, at least from what I've seen from my very short time in Evocati, it's been a crazy week at work, unfortunately, so I haven't been able to get in as much as I would like. It seems like a pretty stable patch, and they've still got to implement a few things that could still break it and create some blockers. There's still some blockers in the patch, and I'll get to when I show the patch notes, but it seems like it's in pretty good shape. They've kind of rounded the corner on the whole cargo moving thing, so we'll see. I think 2 weeks out is pretty reasonable. With that said, let's go ahead and bounce over to the Evocati patch notes. So the one thing that I wanted to point out, because there's plenty of content creators that have been talking about this and going into it ad nauseum and kind of doing their little projections, the one thing that I want to point out, not ready for testing or feedback, but is supposed to be in this, is the cargo commodity rebalance. And I have been saying for years that this is probably the most needed thing in Star Citizen. Years ago, like 2017, 2018, it made sense to just kind of have a simplified economy. And back then, we just thought that the new economy was right around the corner because it kept being like 3 to 6 months we're going to be getting Quana and all that. And then that gradually started stretching out. Now they're not doing dates anymore. Largely for that and a couple other reasons, but this was always one of those things that had it just been 6 months or a year, a simple sort of the economy that we have in the game right now, which isn't an economy, just never really made sense, but it was fine for a short-term solution. But 10 years, really 7.5 years of the real verse kind of coming together, they should have faked the economy to a greater degree. Just when you're pulling up to a space station that is the major trade hub for an entire planet, and the only two things it sells are scrap and waste, something has gone off the rails. That right there should have been the trade locations. And eventually what will happen is the economy will be run by Quantum, and so everything will be dynamic. And if you believe the verbiage, and we should be hearing more about this, I would hope soon, basically you'll have sort of base components. So think like mines will go out, or miners, either or, will produce raw ore, and then those raw components will be used to make more complicated things. Like quartz will be used to make glass, and then glass will be used to make like screens on a computer combined with plastics and other things, complicated components that would go together to form more and more complicated things, till eventually you've got spaceships and weapons for spaceships and all of that. But it starts at that base, so the whole chain is controlled by that economy and Quantum in the background. And if you're missing any part of that chain, it would break down at the end. So for example, if you don't have anyone mining quartz, or if a quartz shipment gets blown up, you can't make glass. Then you can't make those components, and the price of those components go up, and so you can have people actually manipulate the economy in that way, and quantum would kind of check that to a certain degree, but you would have like a real place where people could flow into, people could fit into any link on that chain and still be able to find their niche. And that is what's been missing for years and years and years. And that committee, or that cargo commodity rebalance, hopefully that is, it's not going to be quantum, but hopefully it's a little bit better faked than what we've had to this point, like more balance. Basically, what I would like to see is the stations have every commodity that is produced on that planet on their location, and it would take every commodity that that planet needs in order to survive or produce those commodities. So someplace like ArcCorp that doesn't have mining on it would be importing just tons and tons and tons of raw ore and raw materials to produce all of the components and the stuff that they create. And same thing with Crusader. It's a gas giant. It doesn't have any mines on it. So it'd have tons of mining imports and tons of things like ship components that they'd be exporting. And you get the idea. Hurston would be exporting weapons, and they do have mines, so they might be exporting minerals and raw ore too. But you get the idea. Everything should be going through those stations, just because it's cheaper to go station to station than it is to fly down to a planet, fly off of a planet. And you have things like the Whole Sea that can do it. So hopefully that is what we see, is just it'll create little places where small traders have their little place where they can make a living, or even play the entire lifetime of the game if they want to, carve out their little area of the verse. And then you have like the big cargo movers up to like the Whole C, but like the Whole D and the Whole E would have their place up at the top. So they'd be transferring or commodities from system to system, but they wouldn't be able to make those little transfers between the tiny hubs because the margins just aren't there for them. But they have to start putting those margins in there to make this stuff up here worth it. Because if I am manually loading my ship, even with my couple friends, and it takes 30 minutes, that better be worth it monetarily, and I better be earning something similar to what someone mining or salvaging is making in a similar amount of time, or everybody is just going to do mining and salvaging as opposed to running cargo, and they might as well not spend any time on this loop. They don't want that, so I assume they're going to balance it to that point. And that was just the big thing that I wanted to talk about. As you can see, there are a bunch of known issues here. None of them seem particularly game breaking. They are definitely not the kinds of things you would want in a live build, but they're not things that are kind of, this patch is never going to go out because this thing will never be fixed. I'm optimistic that this one, 2 weeks from now, it'll at least be wider PTU, barring some unforeseen blocker popping up out of nowhere. And gang, that's all I got for this one. I should have a couple more videos coming out soon. Like I said, work has been rough, and there is light at the end of the tunnel, so more stuff coming soon. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for all the support, and catch me next time.